Alright guys, so we're going to read our second book on activism, and this book is about a man named Nelson Mandela, and he is not an activist from the United States, but still did some pretty incredible things in his country of South Africa. So remember, we talked about Library of Basra, and the Librarian of Basra was kind of an environmental activist because she was going into the burning building and risking her freedom and possibly her life to save these books, and having her friends help her and all this other stuff. So remember, activism is one's actions to help either a group of people or a group of animals or an environment or anything. So you're an activist, you're speaking up for a cause. You have a purpose that you're trying to stand up for that may not be represented or may not be being stood up for by other people. So we're gonna, at the end, you guys can kind of tell me maybe tomorrow on the Zoom call what type of activist you think Nelson Mandela is. But remember the three types. Social, so an activist who is trying to create change for the way either humans are being treated or the way, or are they able to speak their minds. So social activism is humans and how we interact. Political, you're trying to create laws or get rid of laws that may be unfair, so you're standing up for political activism to represent different groups of people and the laws that protect them. Or environmental, and that's a lot of in the nature and helping out animals and helping out the ocean, and kind of global warming is a big environmental activism hotspot. So some of the vocabulary words. I wanted to go over 6 before we get started because there are some different words in here. So this one looks like a weird word. It looks like disguise, but it is called disguise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a definition of each vocabulary word, and then maybe a synonym, a word that means the same thing, just so that we're ready for whenever we start to read this book together, we have a good idea of some of these different words that you might not know. So disguise. Disguise, the definition for disguise really is just simply changing the way you look, changing your clothes, changing your hair, just changing something about yourself so that you are not being able to be recognized, or somebody might not recognize you. So if I walked in with a mask on and different clothes to school one day, then I might, like a Halloween mask, you guys might not know who it is until I take it off. I could also put like sunglasses on and a hat and all this other stuff, and I could disguise myself. So a synonym for that I thought of was tricky. Kind of means the same thing. You're being tricky when you're in disguise. Fertile is the next word. So fertile. And you might hear some people pronounce it fertile, but I say fertile. But fertile just really means that it usually talks about dirt and soil, and how if something is fertile, it's able to produce crops. It is very nice soil. Plants really like fertile ground because they can grow and be big and healthy. So a synonym for that is either rich. So you might hear somebody say, this is really rich soil. It doesn't mean that that dirt has a bunch of money. It just means that it is really good for growing crops. Or nice. One of those two. Conquer is our next vocabulary word. Conquer. Conquer means that you are kind of using force most of the time to take over either a country or a group of people. So when you conquer something, you are taking it for yourself. You are, sometimes in history, you are stealing something if you are conquering someone, but you are overtaking, you are taking control of something. So another synonym for this is what I just said, is taking over. This one's really important because this is kind of the big message throughout this book. It's called apartheid. And apartheid is kind of like something that we've had in our history here in America. You may have heard, we've talked about the word segregation before, but apartheid is splitting up your country or splitting up your community based on race, the way they look, maybe the color of your skin, or maybe some other different things about your body. But apartheid is just simply splitting up people based on their race and creating inequality, or creating things that not everybody is equal. So we will read a lot about that here, but again, segregation. Next word, treason. Treason is whenever you kind of are either going against your own government, so you might be going to war with your own government. You might think, wow, these rules are really unfair. I'm going to go and say something to my government or go against them. Or you might be giving information to other countries to help you take back control or to do something in your own country. So treason is very, very serious. It's something that a lot of countries take it very serious, and so the synonym I thought of is basically cheating, like you're not being fair about it or anything like that, but we'll read about that. And the last word, and I like to kind of break this up into two chunks, and the first chunk is one letter, but oppression. And oppression just means you are treating people unfairly. You are being unfair or cruel to a certain group of people. And so another one, a synonym that I thought of for this is hate. So oppression, you're treating other groups of humans or animals or something, you're oppressing them, you're just treating them unfairly. And there might not always be a good reason for that. So, let's get started with our book. Our book is Nelson Mandela. And there are some African words in here. There are some words that I'm going to try my best to pronounce, but that's all I can do, just try my best. Rohala played barefooted on the grassy hills of Canoe. He fought boys with sticks and shot birds with slingshots. The smartest Madiba child of 13, he was the only one chosen for school. His new teacher would not say his tribal name. She called him Nelson instead. Nelson was 9 when his father joined the ancestors in the sky. And ancestors are usually family members that came before you, and so they may have passed away. And so when it says Nelson was 9 when his father joined the ancestors in the sky, it means that Nelson's father died when he was fairly young. To continue his schooling, Nelson was sent miles away to live with a powerful chief. Brace yourself, my boy. His mother held her tears and said goodbye. So 9 years old, heading off away from his family to go live with the chief. The chief held counsel to warriors, medicine men, farmers, and laborers. The elder ones told stories of old Africa. For centuries, Tembu, Pandu, Xhosa, and Zulu peoples lived in the mountains and valleys of South Africa. The land was bountiful, fertile, and rich. So that land was really good for growing crops. The people hunted, fished, and raised crops, living in relative peace, but they made war on European settlers who came in search of land and treasure. The settlers' weapons were stronger and breathed fire. Now I want you to kind of stop for a second and think about what do you think they mean by their weapons breathe fire? It's not actually like a dragon breathing fire, but think about weapons that might look like they're breathing fire. That's something that they've probably never seen before. Slowly, the people were conquered. The South African people were conquered. Their land was taken and spirits dimmed. South Africa belonged to Europe. The elders grew quiet, and Nelson felt sorry. Nelson grew into a young man and attended fine schools in the golden city of Johannesburg, where Africans were poor and powerless. Nelson became a lawyer and defended those who could not defend themselves. And a lot of times when communities or even countries were conquered, it doesn't mean that you are kicked out of that country. It usually just means that if you're conquered, you have to follow different rules that you're not used to. You are going to start to become treated unfairly most of the time if you're conquered. So even though that the Europeans, people over in Europe, conquered South Africa, the South Africans and Africans were still living here, so they did not get kicked out. The government grew harsh and created a cruel policy. It split people in three: African, Indian, European. It was called apartheid. The people were set apart. European-only beaches, European-only parks, European-only theaters, and the people protested. So everywhere they go, if you were African or Indian, you usually could not use any of these things. It was usually just European settlers, which were predominantly white, mostly white. Nelson organized rallies to fight apartheid. We must win back Africa, he told them. South Africa is for all South Africans. Amandala, he shouted. Nagwathu, he responded. Power to the people, and the people loved him. Now he's kind of going against the government right now, and so this is a very scary time for Nelson. But when you feel so strongly about something, you're not necessarily worried about getting in trouble. You just want to help everybody you can, and he had rallies, which are big groups of people listening to maybe one or a few people talk. So he cared a lot about his country and was willing to risk it all. Speaking out was against the law, and Nelson was arrested and jailed for a fortnight with 100 men. They danced and sang, calling the ancestors to join the fight for freedom. Amandala, Nagwathu. The ancestors sent their daughter, Winnie, to stand next to Nelson. They found love and married and welcomed children into the world. Together they stood and fought apartheid. The state vowed to put Nelson in jail, and he went underground. He wore different disguises and lived in the shadows. Empty flats, farmhouses, and bedrooms of friends became Nelson's home, while he organized more rallies and more protests. The police put out a warrant for his arrest, but they could not find him. And remember, protesting is just whenever you feel that something is not right or unjust, you go and you speak against it. So there's a bunch of protests going on all throughout the country each year. Nelson slipped across the border to visit nations where black Liberians, Ethiopians, and Moroccans freely conversed with white Europeans and brown Egyptians. They shook hands, a glimpse of freedom for life at home. Nelson returned to South Africa to cleanse the homeland of hate and discrimination. So just a couple countries over he went, and he saw that it is possible to live in peace. It is possible for white Europeans and Africans to get along and live peacefully. With a vision for peace and harmony, Nelson felt renewed and ready to fight for freedom. But on a drive to town, he was captured, arrested, and taken to jail. The people cried, "Free Mandela! Free Mandela!" Wet paint and posters covered South African walls. On a small island off the coast of the southern tip of Africa, Nelson sat in a tiny cell. Every day the world passed him by. Cold mealies, thin blankets, hard labor. Nelson hammered rocks into dust and read, studied, and educated fellow prisoners. Days turned into weeks, months, and years. So even though he was taken to jail and he doesn't really know where he's going, he's still in there helping out his fellow South Africans and still trying to spread the word of peace and harmony and to fight apartheid. It's amazing. His children grew up, relatives passed away. South Africa began to fall apart. There were more protests, more rallies, and violence. People needed a leader. Nelson snuck a message to the people: I will return. As years passed, the world pressed South Africa to change. The new president agreed, and European-only signs came down. Beaches, parks, and theaters opened. Nelson's comrades were set free. Apartheid was no more. Nelson was an old man. After 27 and a half years in prison, the gates opened, and Nelson was at last set free. So he spent 27 and a half years in jail just because he was trying to be peaceful and trying to make his country work as one community rather than a split community. Thousands surrounded him, and Winnie hugged him. Nelson looked into the sky and smiled at the ancestors. Mandela, thank you. The sun sparkled in his gray and white hair. Nelson stood proudly with the wind at his back and spoke to a colorful sea of people. We must forget our terrible past and build a better future for South Africa. Let us continue to fight for justice and walk the last mile to freedom. Millions were given the vote and elected Nelson Mandela their new leader. South Africa was free at last and finally at peace. The ancestors, the people, and the world celebrated. Mandela, Nagwafu. And there's a good picture, an actual picture of Nelson Mandela. So, what I want you to do, and it's a pretty hard story, and it's a confusing story on why humans were acting like this, and why would somebody conquer an entire country if they may have not done anything to them. And it's a really hard thing to explain. But what I want you to get ready to do is, by tomorrow or Monday, I'd like you to write me a paragraph about how Nelson Mandela is an activist, and what did he do, how did he fight for what he believed in. He did a lot of things, and he didn't have to do this. You know, when people think about activism, it's like, well, one person can't change this. One person can't possibly change an entire country. And this is an example of somebody who did exactly that. And without Nelson Mandela, there may have been somebody else, but we'll never know, because he took it upon himself. He was brave, he was fearless, he was courageous, and he was able to fight for something that he believes in. So I think that, you know, environmental activism, maybe not so much, but political activism and social activism, that's what I think Nelson Mandela showed, and that's the type of activist that I believe he is. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it's a long video, but it's important to me. This is one of my favorite units to speak about, and instead of becoming discouraged and being sad about not being able to teach you guys in class, I want to keep going with it. So write that paragraph. I can't wait to read what you come up with, and hope that you enjoyed the story of Nelson Mandela. All right, guys.